Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Sleep Stories TV. Tonight we continue our Greek mythology series with the Hubris of Bellerophon and Pegasus, the 8th chapter. A hero soars, but pride casts a shadow. If you haven't subscribed to Sleep Stories TV, join us now. Hit that bell and don't miss a tale. Now let's step into the myth where ambition meets its fall. If the story of Perseus is a song of destiny, then the story of Bellerophon is a tragic warning about the dangers of ambition when a mortal dares to think he can equal the gods. In the tapestry of Greek mythology, where heroes rise and fall like the tides, under the watchful eyes of Olympus, Bellerophon's tale stands apart, not as a triumphant ode to courage or divine favor, but as a somber elegy for those who reach too far beyond their mortal bounds. Unlike Perseus, whose path was carved by the fates, guided by prophecy and divine gifts to slay monsters and claim his rightful place, Bellerophon's journey is a jagged arc, one that begins in the shadows of misfortune and ascends to dazzling heights, only to plummet into the abyss of divine retribution. His story is not one of a hero destined for eternal glory, but of a man whose brilliance and bravery were undone by a single fatal flaw, hubris, that perilous pride that whispers to mortals they might rival the immortals. To understand Bellerophon is to understand the delicate balance the Greeks revered, the line between human achievement and divine prerogative, a line that once crossed invites the wrath of the gods. His tale is etched in the ancient songs of poets preserved in the fragments of Pindar and the dramas of Euripides, where the hero's name is both celebrated and mourned. Bellerophon, born of Corinth, a city kissed by the sea and cradled by mountains, was no ordinary mortal. Some said he was the son of Poseidon, the earth-shaker god of the seas, whose divine blood coursed through his veins, granting him strength and charisma that set him apart. Others claimed his father was Glaucus, a mortal king, grounding him firmly in the world of men. Regardless of his lineage, Bellerophon was a figure of promise, a young man whose life might have been unremarkable had it not been for the cruel twist of fate that set his story in motion. His tale begins not with a grand quest or a divine summons, but with a mistake, a moment of violence that stained his hands and cast him into exile. From this humble and troubled origin, Bellerophon's path would lead him to feats that echoed across the ancient world, to battles against monsters and men, to victories that made his name synonymous with heroism. Yet it was not his triumphs that defined him, but his fall, a fall so profound it became a cautionary tale for generations. The Greeks, who wove their myths to teach as much as to entertain, saw in Bellerophon a mirror of their own ambitions and fears. To them, the gods were not distant abstractions, but living forces jealous of their power and quick to punish those who dared to encroach upon it. Bellerophon's story, then, is not merely a narrative of adventure, but a meditation on the human condition, on the allure of greatness, and the peril of forgetting one's place in the cosmic order. As we trace his journey, we see a man who began as a victim of circumstance, who rose through courage and ingenuity to touch the divine, only to be cast down for believing he could claim a seat among the gods. His tale unfolds like a storm gathering on the horizon, slowly at first, with whispers of potential, then with a fury that sweeps all before it, and finally, with a devastating calm that leaves only ruins in its wake. The tragedy of Bellerophon is not just in his punishment, but in how close he came to eternal glory, only to lose it all through his own choices. His story begins in the city of Tiryns, where a young man burdened by guilt and seeking redemption steps into the court of a king, unaware that his arrival will set in motion a chain of events that will lead him to the edge of the heavens and back to the dust of the earth. Bellerophon's journey began not with glory, but with a stain he accidentally committed murder. and had to seek out King Proetus of Tyrans to be purified. In the ancient world of Greece, where blood guilt clung to a man like a shadow, such an act intentional or not marked, Bellerophon as an outcast, a wanderer severed from his home in Corinth. The details of the crime are shrouded in the mists of myth, with some tales claiming he slew a man named Belarus, earning his name as Bellerophon, the killer of Belarus, while others whisper of a kinsman, perhaps a brother struck down in a moment of reckless passion. Whatever the truth, the weight of that act pressed heavily upon him, driving him from the familiar streets of Corinth, across the rugged hills and valleys to the fortified walls of Tiryns, a city ruled by King Proetus, whose power and piety were renowned. In the Greek world, purification was no simple ritual. It was a sacred act, a plea to the gods to wash away the miasma, the spiritual pollution, that clung to a killer's soul, threatening to bring divine wrath upon both the guilty and those around him. Bellerophon, young and burdened, arrived at the court of Proetus with a bowed head, his heart heavy with remorse, yet still carrying the spark of a man destined for greatness. His presence in Tiryns was not that of a triumphant hero, but of a supplicant, a mortal seeking redemption, in a world where the gods watched every step. Proetus, a king known for his wisdom and hospitality, welcomed Bellerophon, seeing in him not just a fugitive, but a man of potential, perhaps touched by the divine lineage of Poseidon, whose favor was said to linger in Bellerophon's piercing gaze and unyielding spirit. The court of Tiryns was a place of grandeur, its halls lined with bronze and tapestries, its air thick with the scent of olive oil and incense offered to the gods. Here Bellerophon might have found a new beginning, a chance to shed the guilt of his past and forge a new path. The ritual of purification was solemn, with priests chanting hymns to Apollo, the god of cleansing, as they sprinkled Bellerophon with sacred water and offered sacrifices to appease the Furies, those relentless deities who hounded the guilty. Yet even as the rites were performed and the stain of blood guilt began to lift, Bellerophon's arrival in Tiryns set the stage for a new trial, one that would test not his strength, but his honor. The court, for all its splendor, was a place of human desires and hidden dangers, where the eyes of the powerful could turn a man's fate in an instant. Bellerophon, with his youthful vigor and striking features, stood out like a flame in the dim halls of Tiryns, drawing attention not only from the king, but from those whose gazes carried far greater peril. His humility, born of his exile, and his need for redemption made him all the more compelling, a man who carried both the weight of his past and the promise of his future. The Greeks, who cherished their heroes as much for their flaws as for their triumphs, saw in Bellerophon a figure both relatable and extraordinary, a man who had stumbled but refused to be broken. As he knelt before Proetus, cleansed of his crime and ready to rebuild his life, the wheels of fate were already turning, pulling him toward a new conflict that would propel him from the safety of Tiryns into the heart of danger. The court, with its whispers and intrigues, was about to become the crucible where Bellerophon's destiny would be forged not through his own actions, but through the desires and deceptions of others. His journey, begun in shame, was about to take a turn that would lead him to the edge of the impossible, where monsters and divine gifts awaited, and where the seeds of his eventual downfall would be quietly sown. Here his handsome features caught the eye of Queen Stheneboea, and when he bluntly rejected her, her love turned into a venomous hatred. In the grand halls of Tiryns, where the flicker of torchlight cast long shadows across polished stone, Bellerophon stood as a figure both striking and vulnerable, his presence a quiet storm in the court of King Proetus. Freshly purified of his blood guilt, he carried himself with the cautious dignity of a man reborn, yet his broad shoulders, piercing eyes, and the faint aura of divine lineage, perhaps from Poseidon himself, made him impossible to ignore. Queen Sthenoboea, the wife of Proetus, was a woman of beauty and power, her gaze sharp as a blade, and her heart a labyrinth of unspoken desires. In Bellerophon, she saw not just a guest seeking redemption, but a man whose vitality and grace stirred something reckless within her. The Greeks, whose myths often wove love and betrayal into the same thread, understood the danger of such attraction, for the gods rarely smiled upon passions that defied the sacred bonds of marriage. Sthenoboea's admiration began innocently enough, with lingering glances across the banquet hall. Her laughter brighter when Bellerophon spoke her questions to him, laced with a warmth that went unnoticed by the court, but burned fiercely in her own heart. Yet Bellerophon, whether out of honor, fear, or loyalty to the hospitality of Proetus, remained steadfastly oblivious to her advances. His heart was fixed on redemption, on proving himself worthy of the second chance the gods had granted him, not on the fleeting temptations of a queen's affection. When Sthenoboea, emboldened by her station and her desire, made her intentions clear, perhaps in a stolen moment in the palace gardens, where the scent of myrtle hung heavy in the air, Bellerophon's response was as sharp as it was uncompromising. He turned away from her, his words firm, his rejection, a shield forged from duty and the lingering weight of his past. To him, to yield would have been to betray not only Proetus, who had cleansed him of his crime, but the very gods who had spared him from ruin. But Sthenoboea was not a woman accustomed to refusal. Her love, once a flame that warmed her, now twisted into a searing venom, a hatred born of wounded pride and the sting of rejection. In the world of Greek myth, where the scorned could wield lies as deftly as heroes wielded swords, Sthenoboea's wrath was a weapon far more dangerous than any blade. She retreated to her chambers, her mind churning with a plan to destroy the man who had spurned her. With tears that masked her fury, she approached Proetus, weaving a tale of betrayal that turned the truth on its head. She accused Bellerophon of attempting to seduce her, of violating the sacred hospitality of their home, her words dripping with feigned sorrow and righteous indignation. Proetus, bound by the laws of hospitality and the honor of his house, was torn. To kill a guest, even one accused of such a crime, would invite the wrath of Zeus Xenios, the protector of strangers and guests. Yet to ignore his wife's accusations would be to dishonor his marriage and his throne. The king's dilemma was a cruel one, for Bellerophon's very presence in Tiryns had become a spark in a tinderbox of human passions. Sthenoboea's lie was a masterstroke, a manipulation that placed Bellerophon in a trap from which there seemed no escape. Proetus, unable to act directly without risking divine retribution, devised a plan that would rid him of the young hero while keeping his own hands clean. The court, once a place of refuge for Bellerophon, had become a web of deceit, its air thick with unspoken tensions. As Bellerophon stood unaware of the storm gathering around him, Proetus prepared to send him away, not with a farewell, but with a mission cloaked in treachery. The stage was set for a journey that would take Bellerophon far from Tiryns, into a land where his courage would be tested, not by the schemes of mortals, but by the terrors of monsters, corowaners, and monsters. The queen's venomous lie had set in motion a chain of events that would propel Bellerophon toward his greatest triumphs and his ultimate downfall. King Proetus sent Bellerophon to Lycia, giving him a sealed letter to deliver to King Iobates, a letter Bellerophon did not know contained a death sentence for himself. In the shadowed halls of Tiryns, where whispers of betrayal lingered like smoke, Proetus wrestled with the poison of Sthenoboea's accusation. His guest Bellerophon stood accused of a crime that struck at the heart of his honor, yet the sacred laws of hospitality, guarded by Zeus himself, forbade the king from spilling a guest's blood within his own walls. Proetus, a man of cunning, as much as piety, devised a solution, as clever as it was cruel a way to rid himself of Bellerophon without staining his own hands. He summoned the young hero, his face a mask of calm, and spoke words of trust and duty, handing him a folded tablet sealed with wax and inscribed with symbols Bellerophon could not read. "Take this to my ally, King Iobates of Lycia Proetus," said his voice steady, betraying none of the treachery within. "He will welcome you as I have, and this letter will ensure your honor." Bellerophon, still bearing the weight of his past, but buoyed by the hope of a new beginning, accepted the task with a nod, unaware that the tablet bore a chilling command that Iobates should put the bearer to death. The Greeks, who loved their tales laced with irony, wove this moment with a tension that hangs heavy in the air. The hero, carrying his own doom, strides forth with the innocence of a lamb led to slaughter. Bellerophon set out from Tiryns, his heart lighter than it had been since his exile from Corinth, believing this journey might cement his redemption. The road to Lycia was long, winding through the rugged hills of the Peloponnese, across the shimmering waters of the Aegean, to the distant shores of a land where the mountains rose sharp against the sky and the rivers ran swift with the breath of the gods. Lycia, a kingdom of wealth and mystery, was ruled by Iobates, a king whose loyalty to Proetus was matched only by his pragmatism. When Bellerophon arrived, weary but resolute, he was received with the warmth due a guest of such standing. Iobates, unaware of the letter's contents, at first feasted the young hero in his hall, where the tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats and golden wine, and the air was alive with the songs of bards, recounting the deeds of gods and men. For 9 days, as was custom, Iobates honored his guest, sharing bread and stories, while Bellerophon, ever courteous, spoke little of his own trials, his thoughts fixed on delivering the message entrusted to him. On the 10th day, Iobates broke the seal of the tablet, his eyes scanning the cryptic marks that spelled out Proetus's deadly request. The king's face darkened, though he hid his dismay behind a measured smile. To kill a guest outright was to invite the wrath of Zeus, just as it had been for Proetus, and Iobates was no fool to tempt divine retribution. Yet the letter's command could not be ignored, for it came from a trusted ally, and the accusation it carried, Bellerophon's alleged betrayal, demanded justice. The king's mind turned to a solution, one that would fulfill the letter's intent without breaking the sacred bonds of hospitality. He would send Bellerophon on a task so perilous that no mortal could hope to survive, a task that would place the hero's fate in the hands of the gods rather than the king's own sword. The stage was set for a trial that would test not just Bellerophon's strength, but the very favor of the divine, for Iobates chose a foe unlike any other, a monster whose name alone struck terror into the hearts of men. As Bellerophon stood before the Lycian king, unaware of the treachery that had followed him from Tiryns, he sensed the weight of the moment, the shift in the air that comes when fate tightens its grip. The court, with its gleaming columns and watchful eyes, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the words that would send the hero toward a destiny that would either forge his legend or break him entirely. Iobates, his voice steady but his heart heavy with the burden of deception, prepared to speak the words that would send Bellerophon to face the Chimera, a creature born of nightmare, whose fire and fury would be the crucible for the hero's greatest triumph or his doom. To cleverly carry out the order, King Iobates assigned Bellerophon a suicide mission to slay the Chimera, a fire-breathing monster with the body of a lion, a goat, and a serpent. In the great hall of Lycia, where the flickering light of oil lamps cast eerie shadows on the walls, Iobates delivered his command with a voice that carried both authority and a hidden sorrow. For he knew the task was a death sentence cloaked in the guise of honor. The Chimera was no ordinary beast. It was a creature born of divine wrath, a monstrous amalgamation that defied the natural order, its very existence a challenge to mortal courage. Its body was that of a lion, fierce and muscular, with claws that could rend stone and a mane that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light. From its back sprouted the head of a goat, its eyes glowing like embers, its horns sharp as daggers, and from its hindquarters writhed a serpent's tail, its scales glinting with venomous intent. Most terrifying of all was the fire that poured from its maw, a blaze so fierce it could melt bronze and reduce forests to ash in moments. The people of Lycia whispered of villages consumed by its flames, of warriors who had ventured to face it and returned only as whispers on the wind. To confront the chimera on the ground was to court certain death, for no shield could withstand its fire, no sword could pierce its hide before the flames consumed the wielder. Bellerophon, standing before Iobates, felt the weight of the task settle upon him, like a mantle of iron, yet his face betrayed no fear, only a quiet resolve that seemed to draw the attention of both mortals and gods. The court filled with nobles and warriors fell silent, their eyes fixed on the young hero who had come to them as a stranger bearing a sealed letter. They saw in him a man marked by fate, his broad shoulders and steady gaze hinting at a strength that might against all odds challenge the impossible. But Bellerophon was no fool. He knew the task was beyond the reach of any mortal man alone. The chimera's lair, high in the craggy mountains of Lycia, was a place where the earth itself seemed to recoil, the rocks scorched black, the air thick with the stench of sulfur and death. To face such a creature required more than courage, it demanded a miracle, a gift from the gods themselves. Bellerophon, whose life had been shaped by both misfortune and divine favor, turned his thoughts to the stories he had heard in Corinth, tales of a creature as extraordinary as the chimera was terrifying Pegasus, the winged horse born from the blood of Medusa, a beast of divine beauty whose hooves could touch the clouds. If any hope existed of slaying the chimera, it lay in the sky beyond the reach of its flames and claws. The Greeks, who wove their myths with threads of wonder and terror, saw in the chimera a symbol of chaos, a creature that defied the harmony of the cosmos, and in Bellerophon's quest, they saw a mortal daring to restore that balance. But the path to such a feat was fraught with peril, for Pegasus was no mere horse to be tamed with a rope or a whispered word. It was a creature of the divine, untouchable by mortal hands, its spirit as wild as the winds that carried it across the heavens. Bellerophon's heart, though heavy with the knowledge of the task before him, burned with a determination that seemed to echo the will of the gods themselves. He knew that to face the chimera, he would need to first conquer the impossible by claiming Pegasus as his ally. As he left the hall of Iobates, the eyes of the Lycian court followed him, some with pity, others with awe, for they sensed that this moment was the beginning of a legend that would be sung for generations. The mountains of Lycia loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist, hiding the terror that awaited. Bellerophon, alone but undaunted, set his sights on the sacred spring of Pyrenae, where Pegasus was said to drink his mind, already turning to the divine aid he would need to achieve what no man had done before. The trial of the chimera was not just a test of strength, but a crucible that would forge Bellerophon's destiny, leading him to the edge of the divine and setting the stage for the triumphs and the tragedy that would follow. Knowing he needed an extraordinary advantage, Bellerophon sought to tame Pegasus, the divine winged horse born from the neck of Medusa. The task of slaying the chimera, that monstrous terror of fire and fang, loomed over Bellerophon like a storm cloud, its impossibility a weight that pressed against his every thought. He was no stranger to hardship, having carried the stain of blood guilt from Corinth to Tyrannus and now to Lycia, but this challenge was different. a beast born of divine chaos untouchable by mortal strength alone. Bellerophon, with his sharp mind and unyielding spirit, understood that to face the chimera on the ground was to embrace death. His only hope lay in the heavens, where the creature's flames could not reach. The tales of Pegasus, whispered in the courts of Corinth and sung by bards in the halls of Tyrans, had followed him like a beacon. This was no ordinary steed, but a creature of myth born from the severed neck of the Gorgon Medusa. When Perseus struck her down, a being of divine beauty, whose wings could cleave the sky and whose hooves sparked light as they touched the clouds. Pegasus was said to roam the wild places of the world untamed and untouchable, a symbol of freedom and divine favor, its mane shimmering like moonlight on water, its eyes holding the wisdom of the gods. To tame such a creature was as daunting as facing the chimera itself, for Pegasus answered to no mortal, its spirit as wild as the winds that carried it. Bellerophon, driven by both necessity and a spark of ambition that had yet to turn to hubris, set out for the sacred spring of Pyrenae, a place nestled in the hills of Corinth, where the earth was said to be kissed by the gods. The journey was long, and the path treacherous, winding through forests, where shadows danced, and across plains, where the sun beat down with unrelenting heat. Yet Bellerophon's heart was steady, his purpose clear, for he knew that without Pegasus, his quest was doomed. The spring of Pyrenae was a place of quiet reverence, its waters clear as crystal, reflecting the stars that hung above at night. It was here, the stories said, that Pegasus came to drink its wings, casting a fleeting shadow over the water before it soared back to the heavens. Bellerophon arrived at the spring under a sky heavy with twilight, the air cool and alive with the hum of cicadas. He knelt by the water's edge, his hands tracing the smooth stones, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the divine horse. Days passed, each one a test of patience, as Bellerophon waited, his prayers rising to the gods, his heart open to their will. The Greeks, whose myths were as much about divine intervention as human endeavor, understood that no mortal could claim a creature like Pegasus through strength alone. It required the favor of the divine, a bridge between the mortal and the eternal. Bellerophon's vigil was not in vain, for his courage and humility had not gone unnoticed by the gods who watched from Olympus. As he slept one night by the spring, the air around him grew warm, and a presence filled the darkness, serene yet powerful. In a dream, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, appeared before him, her eyes like polished silver, her voice a melody that calmed the storm within his soul. She spoke of his destiny, of the trials that awaited, and of the need for a heart both brave and wise. In her hands she held a golden bridle, its links gleaming with a light that seemed to pulse with divine energy. With this, she said, you may tame the untamable, but remember, mortal, that divine gifts come with a price. Bellerophon awoke the bridle in his hands, its weight both a promise and a warning. When Pegasus descended to the spring at dawn, its wings stirring the air into a gentle whirlwind, Bellerophon approached with a reverence that bordered on awe. The horse, sensing the divine gift, lowered its head, and with a steady hand, Bellerophon slipped the golden bridle over its neck. In that moment, mortal and divine were joined, a partnership forged not by force, but by the will of the gods. As Bellerophon mounted Pegasus, feeling the power of its wings beneath him, he knew he held the key to facing the chimera, a key that would elevate him to the heights of heroism, but also plant the first seeds of the pride that would one day lead to his fall. The mountains of Lycia awaited, and with them a battle that would etch Bellerophon's name into the annals of myth. In a dream, the goddess Athena smiled upon his courage and gave Bellerophon a golden bridle, the only thing that could subdue the divine steed. as Bellerophon waited by the sacred spring of Pyrenees, his heart heavy with the weight of his impossible task. The boundary between the mortal world and the divine began to blur, as if the gods themselves were stirring, drawn by the quiet fire of his resolve. Night had fallen over the hills of Corinth, the stars above burning bright, in a sky that seemed to hold its breath, and Bellerophon, weary from days of vigil, lay down beside the spring, the gentle ripple of its waters, a lullaby that carried him into the realm of dreams. There, in the stillness of that otherworldly place where mortal and divine meet Athena, appeared a vision of wisdom and strength, her owl perched silently on her shoulder, her armor gleaming with a light that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the cosmos. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, looked upon Bellerophon not with judgment, but with a recognition of the courage that burned within him, a courage that had carried him from the shame of exile to the edge of a destiny few mortals could claim. She spoke, her voice both gentle and commanding, like the rustle of leaves before a storm. "Bellerophon," she said, "your heart is bold and your purpose pure, but the path you tread is perilous, and no mortal strength alone can conquer the chimera." In her hands she held a golden bridle, its links woven with divine craft, each one shimmering as if forged from the rays of the sun itself. "This," she continued, "is the key to Pegasus, the steed born of divine blood, but wield it with humility, for the gifts of the gods are not yours to own." Bellerophon, even in the haze of his dream, felt the weight of her words, a reminder that his journey was not his alone, but a thread in the tapestry of the gods' design. When he awoke, the first light of dawn painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, the bridle lay in his hands, its warmth a tangible echo of Athena's presence. The Greeks, who saw the divine in every facet of their world, understood such moments as more than mere dreams. They were interventions, signs that the gods had taken notice that a mortal's fate had caught the attention of Olympus. Bellerophon rose, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and determination, and turned his gaze to the spring, where the air shimmered with an expectant stillness. As if summoned by the will of Athena herself, Pegasus descended its wings, cutting through the morning mist, its hooves touching the earth with a grace that seemed to defy gravity. The horse was a vision of divine beauty, its coat white as the foam of the sea, its eyes deep with an ancient wisdom, its wings folding like clouds against its sides. Bellerophon approached the golden bridle gleaming in his hands, his steps steady but reverent, for he knew he stood in the presence of something sacred. Pegasus, sensing the divine gift, lowered its head, and with a gentleness born of trust, Bellerophon slipped the bridle over its neck, feeling the connection between them snap into place like a chord struck in the heavens. In that moment, mortal and divine were bound not by force but by a shared purpose, a partnership that would carry them into the heart of legend. Bellerophon mounted Pegasus, the steed's muscles rippling beneath him, and with a single beat of its wings, they rose into the air, the world falling away below. The wind roared in Bellerophon's ears, the spring of Pyrenees shrinking to a glint of silver, and for the first time he felt the exhilaration of touching the divine, of moving through a realm no mortal was meant to tread. Yet even in this moment of triumph, Athena's warning lingered in his mind, a faint whisper of caution amid the rush of victory. The golden bridle was not a prize but a responsibility, a reminder that his strength came not from himself alone, but from the gods who had chosen to aid him. As Pegasus soared toward the mountains of Lycia, where the chimera's lair awaited Bellerophon's thoughts, turned to the battle ahead, his heart alight with the fire of a hero on the cusp of greatness. The divine gift had opened a path to the impossible, but it was a path he would walk with both courage and the shadow of destiny, for the gods, ever watchful, would not forget the mortal who rode the winds with a steed born of their own power. The skies of Lycia beckoned, and with them the moment that would define Bellerophon's legend, or begin the unraveling of his fate. Riding Pegasus through the sky, Bellerophon demonstrated his intelligence by using a lead-tipped spear to destroy the chimera from the inside. As the winged horse soared over the rugged peaks of Lycia, the wind whipping through Bellerophon's hair, and the world below a patchwork of shadow and stone, he felt the pulse of destiny in his veins, a moment where mortal courage and divine favor converged to face a terror born of chaos. The chimera's lair lay nestled in a scorched valley, where the earth was blackened by its fiery breath, the air thick with the acrid stench of sulfur, and the bones of fallen warriors littered the ground like forgotten offerings. From above, Bellerophon could see the beast, its lion's body pacing restlessly, the goat's head swiveling with unnatural alertness, the serpent's tail hissing as it coiled through the ash. Its roar shook the mountains, a sound that mingled fury and flame, sending a shiver through even the bravest heart. But Bellerophon astride Pegasus was no longer bound to the earth's limitations. The golden bridle, Athena's gift, held the divine steed steady, its wings cutting through the air with a precision that seemed to defy the laws of the mortal world. The Greeks, who cherished cunning as much as courage, saw in Bellerophon's approach not just bravery, but a mind as sharp as the spear he carried. He knew that to face the chimera head-on, as countless warriors had before him, was to invite death in a blaze of fire and claw. The creature's flames could melt bronze, its claws could rend stone, and its serpent tail struck with the speed of lightning. No shield could protect him, no armor could withstand the inferno. But Bellerophon, with a clarity born of necessity, had devised a plan that turned the chimera's own strength against it. In the days leading to this moment, as he journeyed from the spring of Pyrenees to the mountains of Lycia, he had forged a spear unlike any other, its tip not of bronze or iron, but of soft, heavy lead, a metal that seemed an odd choice for a warrior, but was the key to his strategy. As Pegasus circled high above the valley, out of reach of the chimera's flames, Bellerophon gripped the spear, his eyes locked on the beast below. The monster reared its goat's head, bleating a challenge, its lion's maw spewing a torrent of fire that lit the valley like a second sun. Pegasus, guided by the golden bridle, swooped low, its hooves skimming the air just beyond the flame's reach, and Bellerophon, with a cry that echoed his defiance, hurled the spear with all his might. The lead-tipped weapon struck true lodging in the chimera's throat, as it roared the soft metal, melting under the heat of its fiery breath. The genius of Bellerophon's plan lay in its simplicity. The lead once molten flowed into the beast's gullet, choking its flames and searing its insides with its own heat. The chimera thrashed its roars, turning to gurgles, its body convulsing as the molten metal burned through its core. Pegasus ascended sharply, carrying Bellerophon to safety, as the monster collapsed, its flames extinguished its serpent tail, falling limp. Its reign of terror ended in a single brilliant stroke. The valley fell silent save for the crackle of cooling rock and the distant echo of Pegasus's wings. Bellerophon, his heart pounding with triumph, looked down at the fallen beast, the weight of his victory settling over him like a mantle of glory. The Greeks would sing of this moment of the hero who rode the divine horse and outwitted a creature no mortal could face on equal terms. Yet even in this triumph, there was a shadow, a whisper of the pride that would one day undo him. For now, though, Bellerophon was a hero, his name carried on the wind back to the court of Iobates, where the king and his people awaited news of the impossible. The victory over the chimera was not just a feat of arms, but a testament to Bellerophon's intellect, his ability to see beyond the obvious and turn the impossible into reality. As Pegasus landed gently on the valley's edge, Bellerophon dismounted, his eyes still fixed on the fallen beast, his mind already turning to the court of Lycia, where his triumph would be met with awe, and where new challenges born of his success would soon arise. The bond between him and Pegasus, forged by Athena's gift, had carried him to this moment, but the path ahead would test not just his courage, but the humility that had once defined him, a humility that was already beginning to fray under the weight of his newfound glory. Amazed by Bellerophon's feat, Iobates continued to assign him even more dangerous missions, yet he miraculously overcame them all. The news of the Chimera's defeat swept through Lycia like a wildfire, its flames fanned by the awe and disbelief of a people who had lived in the shadow of the monster's terror for too long. In the grand hall of King Iobates, where the air was thick with the scent of myrrh and the echoes of celebratory lyres, Bellerophon stood before the throne, his presence commanding yet humble, the golden bridle of Pegasus gleaming at his side. The king who had sent him to face certain death now looked upon him with a mixture of astonishment and unease, for the sealed letter from Proetus still lingered in his mind, its demand for Bellerophon's death now a thorny dilemma. The Chimera, a creature born of divine wrath, had been vanquished by a mortal, or so it seemed, riding a steed touched by the gods. Iobates, a king seasoned by years of ruling. A land where the divine and mortal worlds brushed closely, sensed the hand of Olympus in Bellerophon's triumph, yet his loyalty to Proetus and the accusation against the hero compelled him to test Bellerophon further. If the gods favored this man, Iobates reasoned, then only tasks of equal impossibility could reveal the extent of their protection or ensure his doom. Thus began a series of trials that would push Bellerophon to the limits of mortal endurance, each one a gauntlet designed to break him, yet each one only adding to the luster of his growing legend. The first of these was a campaign against the Solymi, a fierce tribe of warriors who dwelled in the rugged mountains of Lycia, their name synonymous with savagery and defiance. Known for their relentless raids and their refusal to bow to any king, the Solymi were a scourge that even Iobates' armies had failed to subdue. Bellerophon, astride Pegasus, led a small force into the mountains, where the terrain was as much an enemy as the warriors themselves, jagged cliffs, narrow passes, and ambushes hidden in the mist. Yet Pegasus's wings gave Bellerophon an advantage no army could match. He struck from above his spear, flashing like lightning, his attacks swift and precise, scattering the Solymi like leaves before a storm. The Greeks, who cherished tales of heroism, would later sing of how the winged horse carried Bellerophon through volleys of arrows, untouched by the chaos below his courage, a beacon that rallied the Lycian warriors to victory. The Solymi, broken and driven back, were only the beginning. Iobates, still bound by the letter's command, sent Bellerophon against the Amazons, the warrior women whose prowess in battle was matched only by their disdain for men. In the distant lands where the rivers ran wild and the forests whispered of ancient gods, Bellerophon faced their queen, her bow drawn taut, her warriors a wall of shields and spears. Again, Pegasus proved his divine ally, soaring above the battlefield, allowing Bellerophon to strike at the heart of their formations, his strategy as sharp as his blade. The Amazons, fierce and unyielding, fell before his onslaught, their defeat a testament to the hero who seemed to carry the favor of the gods in his every move. Each victory burnished Bellerophon's name, his fame spreading beyond Lycia to the courts of Greece, where bards wove his deeds into songs that rivaled those of Heracles or Theseus. Yet with each triumph, a subtle change began to take root in Bellerophon's heart, not yet the hubris that would doom him, but a growing confidence, a belief that his victories were his own, forged by his skill and courage alone. The golden bridle, Athena's gift, and Pegasus, the divine steed, were becoming extensions of his will rather than reminders of the gods' favor. Iobates, watching Bellerophon return victorious time and again, began to see not just a hero, but a man touched by something greater, a man whose survival defied the treachery of the letter he had carried. The king's heart softened, his resolve wavering, for to continue testing. Bellerophon was to tempt the gods themselves. The people of Lycia, too, had begun to love their hero, their cheers, a chorus that drowned out the whispers of Proetus's command. As Bellerophon stood before Iobates once more, his armor scarred, but his spirit unbroken, the king faced a choice: continue the deception or embrace the hero who had proven himself worthy of more than death. The trials had forged Bellerophon into a legend, but they had also set the stage for his ascent to glory, and the pride that would follow, lurking like a shadow cast by his radiant triumphs. Finally realizing Bellerophon was protected by the gods, Iobates gave him his daughter's hand in marriage, and half his kingdom, raising the exiled hero to the pinnacle of glory. The court of Lycia, once a place of hidden treachery, now shimmered with celebration, its halls alive with the clatter of bronze cups and the songs of bards who wove Bellerophon's deeds into the fabric of legend. The slaying of the Chimera, the rout of the Solimi, the defeat of the Amazons. These were not mere victories, but miracles, feats that bore the unmistakable mark of divine favor. King Iobates, whose heart had been torn between duty to Proetus and awe at Bellerophon's triumphs, could no longer deny the truth. This was no ordinary mortal, but a man touched by the gods, his path guided by a power greater than any king's command. The sealed letter with its venomous order lay forgotten in the shadow of Bellerophon's radiance, its words rendered powerless by the hero's unbroken string of successes. Iobates, a king who had ruled through wisdom as much as strength, saw in Bellerophon not a threat to be eliminated, but a gift to be embraced, a hero who had transformed Lycia from a land of fear into one of hope. The decision was made in a moment of quiet clarity, as Iobates stood before his people, his eyes resting on Bellerophon, who bore the scars of his trials with a quiet dignity that only deepened the court's reverence. With a voice that carried the weight of a king's decree, Iobates declared Bellerophon not only forgiven but exalted, offering him the hand of his daughter Philonoe, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her grace, and half the kingdom of Lycia, its fertile valleys and shining rivers, a testament to the hero's worth. The Greeks, who saw marriage as a sacred bond that tied mortal lives to the divine order, understood this moment as more than a reward. It was an elevation, a recognition that Bellerophon had transcended his exile to become a figure of almost divine stature. The wedding was a spectacle that drew nobles from across the land, their chariots lining the roads to Lycia, their gifts of gold and amber piling high in the palace courtyard. Philonoe, adorned in robes woven with threads of silver, stood beside Bellerophon, her eyes reflecting both love and the quiet strength of a woman who would share in his destiny. The feasts lasted days, the air filled with the scent of roasted oxen and the laughter of a people unburdened by the terrors of the past. Bellerophon, once a wanderer stained by blood guilt, now stood at the center of this golden moment, his name no longer whispered in shame but shouted in triumph. Pegasus, the divine steed, was stabled in a place of honor, its presence a reminder of the gods' role in Bellerophon's rise, its golden bridle a symbol of the partnership that had made the impossible possible. The people of Lycia, from farmers in the fields to warriors in the hall, looked upon their new prince with a mixture of awe and pride, for he had not only saved them from monsters, but had brought a new era of prosperity and peace. Yet in the midst of this glory, there was a subtle shift in Bellerophon's heart, a flicker of something not yet fully formed, a pride that saw his victories as his own, the divine gifts of Athena and Pegasus, as tools of his will rather than blessings bestowed. The Greeks, whose myths often served as mirrors to the human soul, understood that such moments of triumph were also moments of peril, for the line between heroism and hubris is thin, and the gods are ever watchful of those who tread too close to their domain. Bellerophon, now a prince of Lycia, with a kingdom at his command and a wife at his side, stood at the zenith of his life. His every desire fulfilled, his every deed celebrated. The palace, with its gleaming columns and tapestries woven with scenes of his victories, was a testament to his greatness, yet it was also a stage where the first seeds of his downfall were quietly taking root. The cheers of the crowd, the adoration of his people, the love of Philono, all these fed a growing belief that he was more than mortal, that his place was not just among men, but among the divine. As Bellerophon looked out over the land, he now ruled, his heart swelled with the intoxicating rush of glory, unaware that the gods who had lifted him so high were already watching for the moment when his pride would overreach, setting the stage for a fall that would echo through the ages. But resounding success planted a poisonous seed in Bellerophon's heart. He began to believe his achievements were his alone, and that he deserved a place on Mount Olympus. In the golden halls of Lycia, where the air was sweet with the scent of jasmine and the songs of bards exalted his name, Bellerophon stood at the peak of mortal glory, a prince whose deeds had reshaped the land and whose legend seemed to touch the stars themselves. The slaying of the Chimera, the victories over the Solymi and the Amazons, the love of Philonoe, and the wealth of half a kingdom. These were not mere accomplishments, but monuments to a man who had risen from the ashes of exile to a stature few could dream of. The people of Lycia, from the humblest farmer to the proudest warrior, looked upon him as a living hero, their cheers a constant refrain that filled the palace with an intoxicating warmth. Philono, his wife, gazed at him with eyes that mirrored both devotion and pride, her presence a reminder of the life he had built from the ruins of his past. Yet within this radiant tapestry of triumph, a shadow began to grow, subtle at first, like a crack in a marble column, unnoticed amid the splendor, but destined to widen with time. Bellerophon, who had once stood before kings with the humility of a supplicant, began to see himself not as a man blessed by the gods, but as their equal, his victories, a testament to his own strength rather than the divine gifts that had made them possible. The golden bridle. Athena's sacred gift hung in the palace not as a symbol of divine favor, but as a trophy, its gleam reflecting Bellerophon's growing sense of self. Pegasus, the divine steed born of Medusa's blood, was no longer a partner, but a tool, its wings an extension of Bellerophon's will rather than a bridge to the divine. The Greeks, whose myths were as much cautionary tales as celebrations, understood this shift as the birth of hubris, that perilous pride that blinds mortals to their place in the cosmic order. In the quiet moments when the feasts had ended and the palace slept, Bellerophon would stand on the high terraces of Lycia, gazing at the night sky, where the stars seemed to whisper of a realm beyond the earth, a realm where the gods dwelt in eternal splendor. Mount Olympus, the home of Zeus and his divine court, loomed in his imagination, not as a forbidden sanctuary, but as a destination, a place where a man of his deeds might rightfully belong. The cheers of the crowd, the weight of his crown, the memory of battles won, all these fed a belief that he had transcended the limits of mortality, that his triumphs were not gifts, but earnings carved from his own courage and cunning. The gods, he thought, had merely provided the stage. It was he who had performed the miracles. This was no sudden transformation, but a slow poison seeping into his soul, with every accolade, every song that praised his name without mention of Athena's bridle or Pegasus's wings. The Greeks knew that hubris was not born in a single moment, but grew like a vine wrapping itself around the heart until it choked out humility. Bellerophon, who had once knelt at the spring of Pyrenae, awed by Athena's presence, now walked with a stride that spoke of certainty, his eyes no longer seeking the gods' approval, but assuming their admiration. His court, unaware of the change within him, continued to celebrate their voices, a chorus that drowned out the warnings of the poets, who knew that the gods were jealous of their power and quick to punish those who dared to claim it. In the markets of Lycia, whispers began to circulate not of doubt, but of wonder, as if Bellerophon's deeds placed him beyond the realm of men, closer to the divine than any mortal should be. These whispers, though, meant as praise, were the fuel that fed his growing pride, each one a drop of venom in the seed that had taken root. As he stood before his people, his armor polished to a mirror's shine, his heart began to yearn for more, not more battles or more lands, but a place among the immortals, a seat on Olympus, where his name would echo forever. The gods, ever watchful, saw this shift, their eyes narrowing as Bellerophon's thoughts turned from gratitude to entitlement. The stage was set for his final act, a moment that would test not his strength or his cunning, but his understanding of the boundary between mortal and divine, a boundary he was beginning to believe he could cross. The palace of Lycia, with its gleaming halls and adoring crowds, was no longer just a home, but a pedestal lifting Bellerophon toward a destiny that would either crown him in glory or cast him into ruin. In a final arrogant act, Bellerophon mounted Pegasus and flew straight towards the heavens, attempting to enter the home of the immortal gods. The air in Lycia was heavy with the scent of victory, the palace halls echoing with the songs of bards, and the laughter of a people who saw their prince as a living legend, a man whose deeds had brushed the divine. Bellerophon, once a humble exile seeking redemption, now stood at the zenith of his glory. His name carved into the annals of myth, his life a tapestry of triumphs woven with the threads of courage, cunning, and divine favor. Yet within his heart, the seed of hubris had grown into a towering vine, its roots entwined with every cheer, every crown, every glance that proclaimed him more than mortal. The golden bridle, Athena's sacred gift, hung in the palace not as a reminder of divine grace, but as a symbol of his own power. Pegasus, the winged horse born of Medusa's blood, was no longer a divine partner, but a steed to carry him to heights no man had dared to reach. The Greeks, whose myths were steeped in the delicate balance between mortal ambition and divine prerogative, saw in Bellerophon's heart a fatal flaw, a pride that whispered he could transcend the boundaries set by the gods. On a morning when the sky was clear, the sun casting a golden glow over the mountains of Lycia, Bellerophon stood on the high terrace of his palace, his eyes fixed on the distant peaks where the clouds seemed to touch the realm of Olympus. The thought had grown in him, not suddenly, but steadily, like a tide rising within his soul. He had slain the Chimera, defeated the Solymi, vanquished the Amazons, and won a kingdom. Surely these deeds made him worthy of a place among the gods, a seat in the halls of Zeus where immortality awaited. The people of Lycia, unaware of the storm brewing in their hero's heart, went about their lefas, their faith in him unshaken, their songs still ringing with his name. But Bellerophon, his mind alight with a vision of divine glory, could no longer be content with earthly honors. He called for Pegasus, the divine steed that had carried him through every trial, and with a hand that no longer trembled with reverence, but burned with certainty, he fastened the golden bridle. The horse, its eyes deep with an ancient wisdom, seemed to pause as if sensing the shift in its rider's soul, but Bellerophon, blind to such omens, mounted and urged Pegasus upward. With a beat of its mighty wings, the steed rose, the earth falling away below the wind, roaring like a chorus of voices urging him onward. Higher and higher they climbed, the air growing thin, the clouds parting to reveal a sky so vast it seemed to hold the secrets of eternity. Bellerophon's heart pounded not with fear, but with exhilaration, for he believed he was ascending to his rightful place, a mortal daring to claim a throne among the immortals. The Greeks who knew the gods were jealous of their power, understood this act as the ultimate transgression, a violation of the cosmic order that separated man from God. On Mount Olympus, where the gods sat in their radiant council, Zeus, the king of the heavens, looked down upon Bellerophon's ascent with eyes that burned like thunder. The mortal who had once been a tool of divine will, a hero lifted by Athena's grace, now dared to breach the sacred boundary, to demand a place among those who shaped the world. The audacity of it stirred the air of Olympus, the gods whispering among themselves, their voices a mix of scorn and indignation. Bellerophon, riding Pegasus through the heavens, saw only the glory ahead, the shimmering peaks of Olympus that seemed within reach, unaware that his pride had already sealed his fate. The world below grew distant, the rivers of Lycia mere threads of silver, the palace a speck lost in the haze, and still he urged Pegasus onward, his heart alight with the belief that he could force his way into the divine realm. The Greeks would later say that hubris is not just pride, but a blindness, a refusal to see the limits of one's own nature, and in this moment Bellerophon was blind indeed. His ascent was not a journey of triumph, but a final step toward ruin, a step that would draw the eyes of Zeus and set in motion a punishment as swift as it was inevitable. The heavens, once a realm of possibility, were about to become the stage for Bellerophon's fall. A fall that would echo through the ages as a warning to all who dared to reach beyond their mortal bounds. Enraged by the mortal's insolence, Zeus did not need his thunderbolt. He simply sent a small gadfly to sting Pegasus. High above the world, where the air was thin and the clouds swirled like a sea of mist, Bellerophon rode Pegasus toward the shimmering peaks of Olympus, his heart ablaze with the conviction that he belonged among the gods. The heavens stretched before him, vast and radiant, the stars close enough to touch their light, a promise of immortality that fueled his reckless ascent. The golden bridle gleamed in his hands. Pegasus's wings beat with a rhythm that seemed to echo his own heartbeat, and for a fleeting moment, Bellerophon felt invincible, a mortal on the cusp of divinity. His past trials, Corinth's exile, the Chimera's flames, the Solymi's spears, mere stepping stones to this ultimate triumph. But the gods seated in their eternal council on Olympus saw not a hero but a transgressor, a man whose pride had blinded him to the sacred order that kept mortals tethered to the earth. Zeus, king of the gods, whose eyes missed nothing, watched Bellerophon's ascent with a fury that crackled like a gathering storm. To the Greeks, whose myths were woven with warnings of hubris, Zeus was not just a ruler, but the guardian of cosmic balance, his wrath reserved for those who dared to blur the line between mortal and divine. Bellerophon's flight was no mere act of ambition, but a direct challenge to that balance and insolence that demanded retribution. Yet Zeus, in his infinite power, chose not the thunderbolt, that blazing weapon that could split mountains and burn cities to ash. Such a punishment would have been too grand, too worthy of the hero Bellerophon had once been. Instead, with a disdain that spoke louder than any bolt, Zeus sent a creature so small, so insignificant, it seemed almost a mockery, a gadfly no larger than a man's thumb, its wings a faint buzz in the vastness of the heavens. This tiny insect, guided by the will of the king of gods, darted through the clouds, its purpose as precise as it was cruel. Pegasus, the divine steed, soared with grace, unaware of the approaching punishment, its loyalty to Bellerophon unbroken, despite the mortal's hubris. The gadfly struck its sting sharp and sudden, piercing the horse's flank, with a pain that shattered the rhythm of its flight. Pegasus, born of divine blood and unaccustomed to such mortal irritation, reared in panic, its wings faltering, its hooves thrashing against the empty air. Bellerophon, caught off guard, clung to the golden bridle, his shouts lost in the roar of the wind as the steed bucked and twisted, its eyes wide with fear. The Greeks, who saw the divine in every detail of the world, understood this moment as more than a simple fall. It was a judgment, a reminder that even the greatest mortal could be undone by the smallest act of divine will. The gadfly, insignificant in its form, was Zeus's rebuke, a symbol of how little effort was needed to humble a man who had dared to reach for the heavens. Bellerophon's dream of Olympus dissolved in an instant, the radiant peaks fading as Pegasus's panic grew, the bond between rider and steed strained to breaking. The hero who had once tamed the untamable now faced the bitter truth that his power was borrowed, his glory a gift that could be revoked. The heavens, which had seemed so welcoming, now turned hostile, the clouds closing around him like a shroud. Zeus's punishment was not just in the act, but in its simplicity. A god who could wield lightning chose instead a creature of the earth, a reminder that Bellerophon's place was below, not above. As Pegasus thrashed, the golden bridle slipped in Bellerophon's hands, its divine light no longer a symbol of triumph, but a weight pulling him toward his fate. The Greeks would later tell this story with a somber tone, their voices low, for it was not just the fall of a man, but the collapse of a dream, a warning etched in the sky for all who followed. The gadfly, having done its work, vanished into the ether, its role complete, while Bellerophon, still clinging to Pegasus, felt the first stirrings of dread, the realization that his ascent had provoked not admiration but wrath. The heavens, once a destination, were now a trap, and the earth below, so far and unforgiving, rushed up to meet him as Pegasus's wings faltered, setting the stage for a fall that would strip him of everything he had gained. Panicked by the sting, Pegasus violently threw Bellerophon from his back, letting him fall from the sky back to the earth, while the horse continued its flight to become the bearer of Zeus's thunderbolts. In the vast shimmering expanse of the heavens where the clouds parted to reveal the radiant peaks of Olympus, Bellerophon's dream of divinity unraveled in a single chaotic moment. The gadfly's sting, sent by Zeus with a precision that mocked the hero's ambition, had pierced Pegasus's flank, shattering the divine steed's graceful ascent. The horse, its eyes wide with pain and panic, reared against the sky, its wings beating erratically, its hooves slashing through the air as if fighting an unseen enemy. Bellerophon, who had ridden Pegasus through battles and triumphs, clung desperately to the golden bridle, his shouts swallowed by the howling wind, his body jolted by the steed's violent thrashing. For a fleeting instant, he glimpsed the peaks of Olympus, their golden light so close he could almost feel their warmth. But the dream was slipping away, torn apart by the reality of his mortal limits. Pegasus, born of divine blood, was no longer his ally, but a force of nature, its loyalty broken by the sting of Zeus's wrath. With a final wrenching buck, the horse threw Bellerophon from its back, the golden bridle slipping from his grasp, his body tumbling through the air like a leaf caught in a storm. The Greeks, whose myths painted the fall of heroes as vividly as their rise, saw in this moment the ultimate consequence of hubris, a mortal cast down from the heavens, his ambition shattered against the unyielding will of the gods. The sky, once a realm of possibility, became a vast, uncaring void, the clouds closing around Bellerophon as he plummeted the earth below, rushing up to meet him with merciless speed. The wind roared in his ears, a deafening chorus that drowned out the songs of his victories, the cheers of Lycia, the love of Philonoe. His fall was not just physical, but cosmic, a descent from the heights of glory to the dust of mortality, a reminder that no man could breach the divine order and emerge unscathed. Pegasus, freed from its rider, soared upward, its wings steady once more, its path now guided not by a mortal's hand, but by the will of Zeus. The steed, born of Medusa's blood and tamed by Athena's gift, was claimed by the king of the gods, destined to serve as the bearer of his thunderbolts, its place in the heavens secured, while Bellerophon's was revoked. The Greeks would later point to the stars, where the constellation of Pegasus gleamed a testament to the horse's divine ascent, while Bellerophon's name became a whisper of warning, a tale of what happens when a mortal dares to reach too far. The earth below, unforgiving in its solidity, met Bellerophon with a violence that matched his fall, his body striking the ground in a desolate plain far from the shining halls of Lycia. The impact was not enough to kill him, but it broke him in ways that no sword or flame ever could. His bones shattered, his vision dimmed, and the world that had once celebrated him now seemed to turn its back. The Greeks, who wove their myths with threads of tragedy, saw in Bellerophon's fall not just punishment, but a profound lesson. The gods lift mortals to great heights, but those heights are leased, not owned, and the price of forgetting this is a fall that strips away all that was gained. Bellerophon, who had once flown above the mountains, now lay in the dust, his body a ruin, his spirit battered by the realization that his pride had cost him everything. The golden bridle, Athena's gift, was Ential's, and Pegasus, the divine steed, were no longer his to command. As he lay broken, the heavens above seemed to mock him, their light a reminder of the realm he had dared to claim, the world he had known, the adoring crowds. The feasts, the kingdom faded into a distant memory, replaced by the silence of a plain where no one would find him, where his story would shift from glory to a cautionary tale. The fall was not the end of Bellerophon's life, but it was the end of his legend, the moment when the hero became a wanderer, his fate sealed by a single act of hubris that would lead him into a twilight of suffering and solitude. Bellerophon survived the fall, but was left crippled, blind, and cursed to wander the earth alone until his death, shunned by gods and men, a tragic end for the hero who once flew too close to the sun. The desolate plain where he struck the earth was no place of honor, no battlefield strewn with the glory of his past victories, but a barren wasteland, its silence a stark contrast to the roaring cheers that had once filled the halls of Lycia. His body, broken by the impact, bore the scars of his hubris, bones shattered, his once piercing eyes clouded with blindness, his strength reduced to a frail echo of the hero who had tamed Pegasus and slain the chimera. The gods, in their unyielding judgment, had spared his life, but it was a mercy more cruel than death, for Bellerophon was left to wander a living cautionary tale, his name no longer sung in triumph, but whispered in warning. The Greeks, whose myths served as mirrors to the human soul, saw in his fate a profound lesson: hubris, that reckless pride that dares to challenge the divine, brings not just punishment, but a stripping away of all that defines a man. Bellerophon, who had once soared above the mountains, now stumbled through the dust, his hands groping for paths he could no longer see, his ears haunted by the memory of Pegasus's wings and the adoring crowds of Lycia. The golden bridle, Athena's gift, was lost to him, and Pegasus, now the bearer of Zeus's thunderbolts, galloped through the heavens, a constellation in the night sky that Bellerophon would never see. The gods, whose favor had once lifted him to dizzying heights, had turned their faces away, their silence a heavier burden than any wound. Men too shunned him, for the Greeks believed that one cursed by the gods carried a miasma, a spiritual stain that could taint all who drew near. The palace of Lycia, with its gleaming columns, and the love of Philono, was a distant dream unreachable across a chasm of divine retribution. Bellerophon's wife, his kingdom, his people, all were lost to him, their voices fading into a past that seemed to belong to another man. He wandered through strange lands, his once proud stride reduced to a halting shuffle, his name a shadow that evoked pity or fear rather than awe. The Greeks, who wove their stories with both beauty and brutality, understood that Bellerophon's punishment was not just in his physical ruin, but in his isolation, a solitude that cut deeper than any sword. He who had once stood at the center of a kingdom now walked alone, his only companions, the memories of his triumphs and the bitter sting of his fall. The plains he crossed, the rivers he forded, the villages he passed through, all were indifferent to the broken figure who had once been a hero, their doors closed to a man marked by divine wrath. In the quiet moments when the wind carried the scent of distant seas, Bellerophon might have remembered the spring of Pyrene, where Athena's voice had promised him glory, or the skies above Lycia, where he had ridden Pegasus to victory. But those memories were now a torment, each one a reminder of what he had lost through his own arrogance. The Greeks, whose myths were as much about teaching as entertaining, saw in Bellerophon's end a universal truth: the gods grant greatness, but they guard their own domain jealously, and those who seek to cross that boundary invite a fall that echoes through time. Bellerophon's life, once a blazing arc across the sky, ended not in a single moment, but in a slow, creeping twilight, his days spent wandering until death claimed him unheralded and unmourned. His story, preserved in the songs of poets like Pindar and the tragedies of Euripides, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the greatest hero is but a mortal, bound by the limits of the human condition. The constellation of Pegasus, gleaming in the night sky, stood as a testament to the divine, while Bellerophon's name became a whisper of warning, a story told to children and warriors alike: to strive is noble, but to reach for the heavens is to court ruin. His tragic end, in its stark contrast to his former glory, sealed his place in the Greek imagination, not as a hero who triumphed, but as one who fell a man, who flew too close to the sun and paid the ultimate price for forgetting his place in the cosmic order. And so, dear friends, we leave Bellerophon wandering, his glory lost to pride's bitter sting. The heavens, once within reach, now mock his fall. Pegasus soars among the stars, but the hero walks alone. The cosmos whispers its warning: hubris brings ruin. Thank you for joining us on Sleep Stories TV. If you love this tale, subscribe and hit the bell. Share your thoughts below. What lessons linger from Bellerophon's fate? Until next time, let the stars guide your dreams.